But in Divergent, we have a little bit of a different turn or a little bit different view, right? In Divergent, the word divergent, let's just look at the word divergent, what it means. First of all, the word divergent means moving or extending in different directions from a common point, differing from each other or from a standard, right? Now, look at the first word, the first definition. The word what you see that pops out in your mind is what? The word
Common
that pop.
point.
You said what?
Common.
Common, right? That means everyone has to think and do and be what? The same, right? Okay, so we're looking at the word common. Now, Pope Francis says the what has gone global. The common good has gone what? Global. So now we take those two things now and we take the word divergent and something is happening there. That means there's going to be a group of people who are not going with the common good or a group of people who are not going with the standard. And what do we do with people who do not go with the standard? If everyone needs to be in the same line, they have this new term called lockstep. If everyone needs to be in lockstep and somebody diverges from that,
Step out of line.
you step out of line, then you must be what?
Go to a camp.
Yeah, exactly.
You must be punished or you must be persecuted or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Because you stepped out of line. So this is what divergent is all about, okay? The whole thing about divergent is that what caught my eye is that you have a bunch of different factions. You have abnegation, the selfless. You have amity.
This is
peaceful.
from the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
You've got candor, which are honest. You have the erudite, which are the intelligent ones, or the scientists. And you have the dauntless, which is your fearless or your police force. Okay? All right. So now you have all of this. The whole film is literally based on, I'm going to show you a couple clips here. The whole film is literally based upon a young girl who grew up in the abnegation faction. The abnegation faction are more so your Christian faction.
You're others focused.
They're your Christian faction, right? How do we know? Well, two things. We have you have the group that's the Christian faction that has rule over the government. America was found as a Christian nation, right? And then you have them also who are selfless. They don't believe in vanity. When you look at them, they are dressed in simplicity. They live a simple life. They take care of the poor and needy. They do all the things that a Christian group ought to do. This is abnegation. The word abnegate means to remove yourself from that, to take away yourself and to do for others. Okay?
Sounds like heaven.
Yes, it almost sounds like heaven. So when I looked at this film, I said, well, I looked at this film I can probably tell you about 14 times now. It came out in 2009. Okay? And every time I looked at it was because there's a message and I found something new within the message. In this beginning of the film, this young lady is getting her hair trimmed by her mom. And the mother is talking about how it is to live in this life of selflessness. If you look at them, you can see that they almost look Amish-like, right? No earrings in the ear, no makeup. They do not look in the mirror too long because they don't believe in being vain. I'm gonna pause it here. Take a look at how she's dressed. You can see, yes, earth tone. You can see this thing is just simple, right? Now, what type of religious group should be this? Should behave this way? God's people should be what? Peculiar, right? Look different from the world, right? But at the same time, help those in need, right? Give an encouraging word. So you're supposed to be selfless. The Bible tells us that if any man pick up his cross, let him pick up his cross. And if any man wants to follow me, pick up his cross and do what? Deny himself and follow me. So we have that there, right? So you can see that this young girl she's living that life of selflessness, okay? And as she goes through the, as she goes through the film in her life, you start to see things change. The way that she's supposed to grow up at a certain point of time, she's supposed to make a decision as to which faction she wants to be in. Her brother and herself are at the age of accountability and to make a choice. Okay, so I found it to be very, very interesting. Now, when she did that, here she is as a little girl growing up with her family as a young person who is understanding the rule of life as a regular person, as simple. You can see that they're simple. They're helping others out. This is what abnegation does. Okay.
Isn't it interesting that they're always like wearing gray?
Yes, because gray is like that tone.
Like
cold. They are the leaders of the government. They are the ones who run the government. So it's a Christian nation that runs the government. The Christian faction runs the government in this film. I found it very interesting because America is the same. Right? Or was the same, because the Bible says that this two-horned beast will be as a lamb, but then eventually speak as a dragon. So I said, okay, what else in this film I can pull together, because there's differences between that and Tomorrow War, right? What's going to be the issue that they will soon have? Well, as we were going through the film, and I noticed a few things. One, science becomes the ruling faction. Okay, science becomes the ruling faction, and once you go over that, and you start realizing that this thing starts taking over, eventually it takes over the government, and people start looking to science for everything. Are we into that phase of our lives today? Yes. Same thing happened in the film. So what I looked at, I said, wait a minute, how do those two, kind of mirror each other? What is the issue that you start to see?
All right, and what changes? How does society change?
And how does society change? Well, two things. One, it happens with children, right? As they get older, you start seeing that children walk away from what they believe. And as they walk away from the belief, you start to see that things start to change as they get older in their mindset. So here, her brother and her brother walked away from the belief of the family. They walked away. Her brother went and joined the erudite, which is the scientists, smart ones, right? And she joins the dauntless, which is the police force, okay? Not knowing that the same government that her brother joined, the smart ones, right? The scientists and those who work in government, he joins that group. She joins the police force. Those two forces start to work together to eliminate the abnegation.
Interesting. So the ideologies of all these are very different.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yet the children growing up in these separate worlds have a choice where they want to go and who they want to join with. In a sense, it's always this re-education.
Exactly.
Wow.
So as you can see in our education system, what's going on? We send our kids to school. They tell you that you have a mind, that you can choose to be whatever you want to be. And the child will take that on, grow up and become whatever they want to be. They choose then to walk away from either what the teachings of the family or the home taught. As we know that the home is your first school.
That's right.
So once you leave out of your home and you're re-educated, then you get to choose whatever it is that you want. And this is exactly what happened to those two children. They chose, and in the film you can see the burden of the parents. They just kind of gasped, right? Because now their children are walking into something they don't have no clue of.
Like a prodigal.
Yes. So and here it is, the moniker now is faction before blood. Faction before blood, meaning that once you choose your faction, you cannot go back.
That's a lot like the Amish, actually. I don't know if you know that in the Amish community, when you reach age of 16, they basically let their child have a big party because you're an adult or whatever, and usually they're getting wasted with all their friends, and at that point, they get to live as an adult. It's in the community. I mean, they live together in a commune. But basically, the parents step back and they say, you know, this is your chance to choose whether you want to go into the world or you want to stay with us. And a lot of them go into some heavy, I think it's like for a year.
Yes.
And a lot of them will get into drugs. They start, you know, dating and doing stuff. One thing that's interesting is the females often will still wear the head wrap, will still wear the modest clothes because they're still kind of shy about that stuff, but they'll still drink and all that stuff.
They have parties.
And the guys will be selling drugs and everything, and the majority of those kids come back. They go back. Yeah. But if they don't, if they're in the rare case where they decide they want the world more, they can't ever talk to their family again.
Yes, because they have to be excommunicated. They have to be excommunicated. They cannot bring that nonsense back into the community, right? So that's what happens in this film. There's no going back.
Wow.
Once you are who you are. Till you know, that's it, till you die, right? The thing is that the problem is that Triss still feels, the girl still has a longing for her home, right? And she starts to learn that she's a divergent. She doesn't believe in the ideologies that they are now pressing upon, right? Remember, you have 5 different factions, and then the last faction is what they call the factionless. These are those who they're not placed, right, in a faction.
Black sheep.
Yes, these are the ones that turned away from what they chose. Once you turn away from what you choose, then you cannot go. You have no place to go. You become factionless. You have no home. You have no life. There's nothing that the society is going to give to you, right? You're living underground.
Literally underground.
Literally.
I was gonna say I've seen stuff like that where there's a group of people.
Yeah, they
underground,
live underground. That's exactly what happens. So she learns she's a divergent, meaning that she's going away from the common good. And then she now ends up going to her brother. She ends up going to her brother and telling her brother, "Listen, I'm in trouble."
The brother hasn't diverged, right?
The brother,
he hasn't diverged.
He's
from
still in the science community.
He's in the science community, right? So she goes to him, and she tells the brother, "Listen, I'm in trouble, and I need your help." Right now, the young man he's liking where he is, and he has what you called assimilated into his new role and into what he does, and into the ideology. He's assimilated into it, right? And she tells him now she's in trouble. He goes to her and says, "Hey, first of all, why are you here? You shouldn't be visiting me." That's the first thing.
Really?
Faction.
No crossover at all.
Faction before blood.
Wow.
Faction before blood. And she says, "Listen, I'm in trouble, right? First of all, I don't belong in Dauntless, okay?" He says, "Well, yeah, they're crazy people in the first place. You probably should never have gone, right?" But she says, "No, there's something different. There's something going on, right?" And then he tells her, "Listen, you can't go back to abnegation. First of all, we are going to take over abnegation. We're going to run the government from now on." And she says, "Why? As a nation, we always have been, because we're selfless. We look for we do it the right way, the way it's supposed to be done." He says, "No, no longer. We're going to take over, and we're going to rule this nation going forward. Right? It's going to be under science that rules the nation." I said, "Wait a minute.
Yeah, look at what's going on.
Look what's going on today. Look what's happening today." And then, as she walks away, she tells him, "Faction before blood." And he goes, "Right, faction before blood." That means whatever you have chosen in your life, you have picked a side. You cannot go. Now, what's the blood that's being, if you really look at this, the word blood, there's only one blood you can focus on in this. It's either you choose world or you choose the blood, right? It's either that.
Wow.
It's either that. You're hearing the world before the blood.
Wow.
I look at it as we have to choose the blood of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
Right? That's the only way we can do it. That's the only way we can survive this. So when I heard faction before blood, I said, wow, the world before Christ.
Right.
You're going to choose one of them.
Or in this case, a science-based government.
Yes. Mm-hmm. In this case, a science-based government. And, and that's exactly what we're seeing today. So as it is right now, she learns at that point that there's something way different. Her brother has changed. She tells her brother, listen, they're going to manipulate you. They're manipulating you here. Your mind is not your own. You are not an independent free thinker anymore, right? That's what a divergent is. A divergent is somebody who independently has their own mind. They can think freely for themselves. No longer are you part of that anymore.
Which is supposed to be what the point of education is. Free thinking. Free thinking. Not being manipulated or led down a particular path.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So when all the parallels were working with me. So I'm like, wait a minute, Divergent and Tomorrow, the two messages are simply totally different. Here it is. You're going to have a group of people that are going to have to be free thinkers and stand on what they believe. She was a divergent. Anybody who stands on what they believe is going to be deemed a divergent, right? They called her a stiff because she stood on what she believed.
That's right.
She wouldn't bend.
She wouldn't bend. And she was different. She came from abnegation. When you come from abnegation, as the Christian faction, they called you stiffs, right? And I went and I said, wait a minute, there's something that was written in Inspiration that talked about people becoming or being called stiffs, right? It says here, when we reach the standard that the Lord would have us to reach, worldlings will regard God's people as odd, singular, straight-laced extremists. We are made a spectacle unto the world and unto the angels and unto men. So right there, that tells us that we too will be called stiffs. Straight-laced mean that you are a stiff. And I said, wow, this is too many parallels. If there was supposed to be a film that anybody would have said that, they're pointing to a certain group of people. It'll be this one, right? It'll be Divergent, right? Because you figure this is what we ought to be. We cannot go with the common good. We cannot just go, what everybody else is doing, so we got to do it too.
Yeah.
So what's the final message that they're getting to? I don't know if you're getting to that.
I'm about to get to that. Yes. And that's a good question. If you want to finish your question, I'm about to get to that as well.
Yeah, no. I'm curious to see.
I wonder what angle they're going.
So it's like, often that lead character is the protagonist, right?
Yes.
And so, you would think that's a good thing that you're, maybe you jumped ship and you're now questioning the group that you were a part of and you're being drawn back to your roots. And, you could see a lot of parallels there. Is that a good thing?
Well, I'm going to show you here where you can see the differences. She's in this part of the film here. This is where the film takes a major turn for her. She now speaks to the person who leads out the erudite. Okay, and she is the leader of the area, and she's the one who's going to take over. She sits her down and she tells her, listen, what I want you to do, what I want you to understand is that we're taking over abnegation because abnegation has broken the rules. They are not abiding by the rules that we have set.
Who is that?
The erudite.
Right, but isn't that how it's supposed to work? Because it's a different world.
It's a different world, right? So they're not abiding by it. And
interesting.
Now watch this. Because they're not abiding by it, and they're harboring divergence.
Okay.
You see, in this faction, which is the abnegation, they have divergence. Because why? These are self-thinking people. We want to get rid of the divergence. That's our job, is to get rid of the divergence.
Those who are questioning the main narrative or whatever.
Exactly. If you question the main narrative, if you speak against us, if you post anything that goes against the narrative, we need to get rid of this certain group of people.
Dude, I just saw a video clip of an official government person in New Zealand. She was talking to the camera and she was like, look, we are your source of truth. If you hear anything else that's not from us, it is not true. Do not believe anything unless it comes from us. We are your source of truth.
Wow.
I was like, I cannot believe this lady is saying these
and
words.
That's amazing. That you have one narrative, one message, and you have to believe and walk with that message. Now, in here, she also said that human nature is the problem. And we need to eradicate that. I'm here to make that change, she says. I'm here to be the leader because I have the vision of eradicating the human issue. Human nature is the problem. It's human nature that we're liars. It's human nature that we're killers. It's human nature that we do all these wrong things. And I'm here. We're here, erudite, to fix that issue. And obviously, abnegation lost that fight.
Right.
You see? So when you hear that Christianity loses the fight on the issues of the world, then you know that something else is taking over. And now they're looking to force. They're looking to cause all men to do something, right? And now the next thing is you would see is that they're going to be talking about a certain vial that goes into the body.
What?
Yes.
Again.
That causes again.
Yeah.
That causes now for it to be for your mind to be susceptible for control. Okay? For your mind to be susceptible to control. So when I saw that, I said, wait a minute. Again, with this whole inoculation situation.
We can fix it with a solution.
If we can fix, yeah, exactly.
Literally.
I said, wait a minute. This is way too much. The parallels and the contrasts are way too much. So now here they are on top of the roof, and this young man who's her partner, her friend, he is showing that, listen, Dauntless, the faction Dauntless, which they're both a part, and Erudite have worked together. This is the government and this is the police or the army, the force.
Church and state.
Church and state have now come together to do what? To create what you call that vial in his hand, which goes into your body, which causes susceptible thinking, which causes you to be, to have mind control.
Wow.
Okay? And I said, wait a minute. So now they're saying this is what they're going to use. They can create a whole army. And they're like, to do what? Create an army to do what? And the whole point is to get rid of divergence. But you think divergence come from every other faction. But no.
They only come from that one.
They only come from that one group of people.
The people that were gray and selfless and all that.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So in here.
Well, doesn't everybody start that way though? Or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
They're the ones that are running the government and stuff, but that's fascinating.
That is.
Yes. In here, you will find out now, as they all become.
Before you go on,
Yes.
these divergents, are they keeping to themselves, or are they like bringing other people into their camp as well?
They're not bringing them. They're just
living their lives.
Yeah, but what happens is you don't know that you're divergent until things start to take place that you're not going along with. You're not going along with it. I have a different mindset, right? Yeah. And how they find out that you're divergent, they put you through these tests, right? Where she was in a thing of water, where in her mind in these dreams she can either drown or try to figure out how to get out of it. Well, she says this is not real. She breaks the glass and walks right out of it, right? She's in a field of fire with birds coming after her. She said, "This ain't real. I'm about to just wake up out of this." So I'm not the one that you're gonna scare off. I'm not gonna be the guy that you're gonna try to cause me to have fear. So they put them through these fear tactic training or tests to see how they react, and she just did not abide by any. She wasn't afraid of that.
We go through that stuff all the time in the public school system. I remember these tests, and it's a lot worse now that I'm not in school. But our daughter goes to a small Christian private school. But in public school systems, they'll often have to take these tests, and I've heard teachers come out and tell the public they got out of the system because of this. Your students, your children in school will have to take a personality test.
Yes.
And it's something that doesn't get graded, it doesn't get sent home to your parents. Your parents never see it, and your kids probably don't think anything about telling them. But there's little questions in here, like if you were in a boat with two other people and the boat starts drowning and one of those persons is maybe a homosexual or something like that, who gets thrown out of the boat? Or there's like these options. Do you do A, you throw this person out? Do you do B, this? And there's no option for like, well, maybe I get out of the boat and I push it, and then
Right.
somebody else we swap, and they're like, no, that's not an option.
No.
They're trying to figure out
what you would do.
Dude, this
Out-
stuff all
profiling.
gets this stuff all gets stored somewhere.
outside of the normal common sense type thing.
Yep.
But they want to see how your brain works.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they did with this young lady.
Yep.
Right? She passed all the tests. How she did it was her friend says, listen, he too is a divergent. He says, you cannot show them that you are a divergent because that's who they're after. Right? So you have to figure out a way to get out of these tests the right way. Like if this thing is, if water's coming up and you see there's a pipe spewing out water, take your coat, stop the water. That's how you would be able to pass these tests. So she ends up passing the test, and she's now, called a Dauntless. She's now officially part of the Dauntless team. And
They think she's officially been brainwashed. Or
yes,
whatever.
and they're all gathering together, and they're all, they call him up and say, hey, listen, you're gonna line up in fours. He says, don't worry about it. This man says, don't worry about it. We all need you to line up in fours, and you're all gonna get pricked.
What?
Oh.
You're all gonna get pricked. We need to be able to make sure we know where you guys are at all times.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So as you can clearly see, she's not looking for her friend. She's like, wait a minute, the same guy who showed her the vial, she's looking for him and saying, where is he at? Because, she understands that he's a divergent. She's a divergent, right? So she's not trying to get pricked. Here she goes walking away. He stops her. And as he stops her, he forces her to get pricked.
That was her friend?
No, boom,
Oh,
she
that
just
was
got
this guy.
pricked
Yeah,
just
yeah,
now. So you see how they did it? This guy stops her, talks to her, and says, you should have been in the front of the line to get pricked. But I'm gonna make it easy for you. And boom, they pricked her.
Wow.
You see, she was walking away from it because, again, she's a divergent, right? She doesn't want to get this thing in her body. She's moving from it because she understands what it's all about, right? Now, the conclusion of this whole thing is, again, they're looking to get rid of the abnegation. So they have a full-on takeover, full-on military force takeover, and they take over by force. And here it is that they're coming. And they're coming by swarms. And she is a part of this crew. This is Dauntless. Dauntless is your force. You can see everyone's face is, they're being controlled by the transponder that's within.
Some robots.
Exactly. This is full robots, and she's a part of it with her friend. But you can clearly see their faces are looking different from everybody else's. Right? Although they got pricked, they're not a part of them. Both of them came from abnegation. They both came from a Christian faction. And they're both now realizing they're in the wrong group. He has been training he's been training Dauntless for a long time, not realizing that one day this same team or same group of people will turn and go against the family and the friends that he loves. Okay? And as they're walking towards them, they start picking them out, pulling, and she goes, I need to get my family out of this. I need to find my parents. And here is where you start seeing even the little kids that were playing in the ground, they run out because they're coming after abnegation. You can see them going home to home, door to door, pulling them out. Okay?
Wow.
And this is exactly what's going to take place. Now, if there is any film that should have been called something that says maybe this can be a part of a certain group of people who worship on the seventh day of the week, on the Sabbath, it would have been this film.
Wow.
Because at the end of the day, they're looking for those who stand up for what's right.
That's big. That's an excellent point, because I'm reminded of, I believe it's Matthew 24, when Jesus is talking to the disciples, what to look out for in the end times and to brace yourself for. And he goes through a bunch of kind of events, catastrophic things are in your face, earthquakes and these things and storms. But the first thing he actually says is, do not be deceived, right? So in comparing these two movies, you have the Tomorrow War that has all these trigger words, Sabbath and all that, and everyone's focus is on that because that's the big stuff. There weren't those trigger words in Divergent, but look,
No.
that's probably where our attention should have been, and to see all these parallels, the subtleties, exactly.
All these very subtleties are there. And it blew my mind because now you saw that this is a series, right?
Yeah.
Guess what's in part 2? They go to the country and they're living in the country.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, seriously.
It's just crazy. Yes, they run away to the country to live in the country.
You know, what's really interesting, have you ever done a little bit of research on, like, who wrote this? What else have they done?
Yes.
Because sometimes, you know, if you have a director like the guy that made The Truman Show, he's also made a slew of other things that are like very Gnostic in its like interpretations, and you can pretty much bet like, wow, this person has a vendetta against this, you know, idea or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
What I noticed when I did the Terminator breakdown is if you just watch part 1, you're going to get a totally different story than if you watch the whole thing. Because in part 1, it looked like, okay, Terminator, he's a bad guy, he could be Satan, and then there's John Connor, he's the savior of the world, his initials are JC, and it looks like a very biblical thing. But then part 2, Terminator's a good guy. Part 6, Genesis, they kill John Connor.
Yes.
And that's so what I'm wondering is if, I still don't know how this movie ends, but I wonder if all 3 parts tell a different story, you know?
It kind of almost does, because in the 3rd part of this Divergent series, they end up realizing that there's a higher power.
Oh.
Yes.
Outside
of this, you know, apocalyptic
dystopia
type of world that they're living in. Because the way the film begins, it says that there was a war, right? And they were the only ones that were left. The entire world that was destroyed. And they built up a wall to protect the people. And they created these factions, is what they did, right? And this is how the film begins, okay? And it's not a utopian type of a world. But when they end up going from part 1 to part 2, they realize, okay, that they're on the run in part 2 because their divergence, they end up, you know, stopping the execution of all these abnegation, right? Christian folks, they stopped it, and now they're on the run. Abnegation, all of them are on the run. They end up in the country with the other faction called Amity. Amity are they're the ones that's peaceful. Right, because they're out there in the grass and they understand nature and they all happy. They look like hippies, right? Okay, so that they end up going out there with those folks in the country, hiding in the country. And I'm saying to myself,
wow,
if this is not a big
flee to the mountains and all this
they
stuff
flee to the mountains,
wow,
because now because they were living in the city, and this whole thing was taken. Now guess where this whole thing was shot. Just take one guess. No, Chicago.
Chicago.
Yes. It was shot in Chicago.
Concrete jungle.
Yes, and I'm not talking about nothing was done in a set. Nothing was done in Hollywood. Everything was literally done in Chicago.
Interesting.
They closed off streets and everything because they wanted the real city feel, right? And they built the set and everything in Chicago.
Wow.
Right? They used everything out there. And then they ran off to the country, leaving the city because they realized that in the city was the major problem of them trying to kill off the abnegation.
Oh, wow.
And I said, wow, this is amazing. Now in part 3, they realized outside of the wall, that they've been behind this wall for so long, outside of the wall was a higher power that controlled everything, mind, and everything that they did. And the reason why is because the higher power wanted those who were divergents to spread the message of being a divergent.
Oh, wow.
So what do you interpret that as? Because, I mean, we look at a lot of Gnostic flips in these movies. If they notice that there's a higher power who really wants the message of the divergency to be spread out.
It's the same thing as Gnosticism at the end of the day.
That's what I was thinking.
It is Gnosticism at the end of the day.
Rebellion is kind of like straying off. When I first saw the definition of divergent, I was thinking, yeah, it's like straying off from, do what thou wilt instead of following the law type thing.
Now, Go ahead. You were gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
That's the whole thing of reverse parallels now. We're going back to reverse parallels because now, does Christ want us to be a divergent? No, because that means we are actually doing what the devil wants to do. Do as thou wilt, which is the whole of the law.
Right. And exactly what Jesus is saying is like, whoever does my will, what is his will? To love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and to love your neighbors yourself, which is an encompassment of the law.
Exactly.
They suck you in with these heart-pulling stories like, oh no, they're going after the good people and all this, and then they flip it on you by part 3.
Yeah.
Well, to be in the faction of Christ is to be a divergent for the world, in a sense.
In a sense, yes. In a sense, but that's a very good point. To be in the faction of Christ is to be a divergent to the world, right? Right? Because remember, you have to either choose Christ, which is the blood, or the faction, and that's what's so important, because it's faction before blood. What does that mean? That means, listen, either you accept the blood of Christ or you accept the faction of the world. And there's no
middle ground.
There's no middle ground. There's no gray area. And at the same time, the reverse parallel is the devil says, well, do as thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. So we have to be able to be very careful in all these films that we that we watch. And a lot of things, I watched this and I was talking to a lot of young people about this stuff. Because I said, many of us watch this stuff for entertainment purposes. The devil is not about the entertainment. He's about securing minds. And God is about securing hearts. So we have to either be on God's side and have our hearts secured, because one day this all will take place, and it's taking place even now. It's starting to build.
Right. Yeah, the foreshadowing of what's actually going on. I mean, for many times on this show, on this channel, and even in this ministry, we've talked about these movies as being this, like, you know, sort of driving force, that's kind of putting out there what's going to happen in the future, but really pushing people into a worldview or a worldly character or something, you know, and that's not what God's wanting us to have or be at all. He's asking for us to hunger and thirst after righteousness. You know, it's not just like, you know, fight against what's going on and rebel against the system, and you know, it's really, I think a moral character is what God is really after.
That's right.
So coming to the prophetic side of all of this, you have the Bible and you have these movies kind of telling similar stories, or the same story from different perspectives, showing probably what Satan wants to happen in the end time, and then what Christ is prophesying will happen in the end time. Which will you give your attention? Which are you preparing for?
Right. And that's why, is it prophetic programming or is it predictive programming? Well, there is a bit of everything in that, right? I mean, when you cook, you got to have some seasoning, you got to have some salt, you're going to have some pepper, right? So there's a bit of both in there in terms of the prophetic programming, because the prophetic programming tells us that there's going to be a split in our society. You can clearly see that now. There are factions in our society.
That's right.
Right? You can clearly see that you have the vax and the unvax. That's going to be a split. And then you're going to have a split because of racism. You're going to have a split because, so you have all these different factions going on. The Bible says it's going to come down to two: rich and the poor, right? That's it. So you're going to have those two in terms of the financial faction. Then you have the old and the young. Then you have the free and the bond, right? These are factions written in Revelation chapter 13, right? You're going to have these type of factions. So that's the prophetic piece. The programming piece lets us know how the media is programming our minds to either choose a side. Either we're going to be on the dauntless and come after God's people, or we're going to be God's people being able to have that love and to accept what's about to take place in our lives.
That's right. Yep. It's coming down to the wheat and the tares, the sheep and the goat. You're going to have to choose one side. That was a really good breakdown, man. I really appreciate it.